3 days after my husband, Calvin, died, I opened his diary. He wrote that in his next life, he wanted to be a cat. That way, I might hold him in my arms, even just once. I cried until I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the dead of night, and lying next to me was Calvin, several years younger. This was our new house, and the time was 5 years ago, on our wedding night. The air was deathly still. In my past life, this was how it always was. He slept on the left side of the bed, I slept on the right, and an uncrossable chasm lay between us. He was a business magnate, and I was a wealthy heiress. Our marriage was a perfect transaction, with no love involved. We were so polite and formal with each other that even arguing felt unnecessary. I always thought he felt the same way I did, that this marriage was just a responsibility. It wasn't until his funeral, when his assistant handed me a locked box, that I learned the truth. Inside was a decade's worth of journals he'd kept since he was a teenager. My name was written on every single page. He'd had a secret crush on me ever since high school, starting the day I casually handed him an umbrella. To be worthy of me, he clawed his way up from an obscure branch of the Kane family to the pinnacle of its power, then used his considerable influence to secure the marriage alliance he'd always dreamed of. He wrote, "Just being able to see her every day is the greatest gift the gods could give me. I don't dare ask for more." He wrote, "She smiled at me today because I blocked a drink someone tried to throw at her. I never sent that wine-stained suit to the dry cleaners. I want to keep the scent of her smile for a few more days." He wrote, "She has a sensitive stomach and always skips meals. I asked Maria to have warm porridge ready for her every day, but I could only bring myself to say it was Maria's idea. I'm such a coward." He wrote, "If I died, would she shed a single tear for me? Probably not. But that's okay, as long as she can live a good life." Clutching that diary, I replayed our 5-year marriage in my head over and over. Every detail I had ignored became a razor-sharp knife, slicing my heart to pieces. That accidental car crash took him, and with him, it took my entire reason for living. I never imagined that behind that cold mask was a love so deep and searing it could drown me. And now, the gods had truly given me a second chance. I looked at him beside me. He was sleeping restlessly, his brow furrowed as if caught in a nightmare. In my last life, I just rolled over coldly, turning my back to him and kicking off 5 lonely years of marriage. But this time, I sniffled, holding back a flood of tears. I carefully scooted closer and then, on my own, clumsily wrapped my arms around him from behind. His body went rigid, his muscles instantly tensing like a startled hedgehog. I could feel his stiff spine and the way his breathing immediately quickened. In the darkness, he asked in a voice tight with restraint and a hint of a tremor, "Selena, what are you doing?" I buried my face in his back, greedily soaking in his warmth as my tears silently soaked through his silk pajamas. "Calvin," I choked out, using every ounce of strength to say the words that were a lifetime too late, "I'm cold." Calvin's body was as stiff as a board. I guess in his world, Selena was a queen on a pedestal, calm, rational, and never, ever showing weakness. The word cold was probably something he never imagined he'd hear from my lips. In the dark, I could clearly feel his confusion. He didn't move a muscle, his breath seemingly frozen, as if terrified of disturbing this uninvited guest. How much of a monster was I in my past life to make him feel like even getting close to me was an offense? The ache in my chest was almost overwhelming. I held on tighter, repeating in a small, tearful voice, "Calvin, I'm really, really cold." It wasn't a lie. In the 6 months after I lost him, my world was a frozen wasteland, devoid of any warmth. That bone-deep chill still lingered in my soul. Finally, just as I was starting to think he'd stay frozen until morning, he moved. He turned over, his movements incredibly slow and stiff. Then, with a tentative touch, as if handling a priceless treasure, he gathered me into his arms. His embrace was not practiced, it was almost clumsy, and he didn't seem to know where to put his arms. But it was warm, the same warmth I remembered, the kind that could shield me from any storm. I couldn't hold back anymore. I buried my face in his chest, and the tears I had suppressed for a lifetime came pouring out. "Don't cry." His voice rumbled from above my head, laced with a barely perceptible panic and pain. He raised his hand, as if to pat my back to comfort me, but it paused midway. In the end, it just landed gently on my hair, stroking it awkwardly. Are you having regrets?" he asked after a long silence, his voice low and almost self-mocking. "Regretting marrying me?" He wrote in his diary that I didn't smile once during our entire wedding. He must have thought I despised him. I shook my head wildly and looked up from his chest, meeting his bottomless eyes in the faint moonlight from the window. Those eyes were filled with pain, insecurity, and a fierce love that he had desperately crushed down into his very core. "No," I said, looking at him and speaking each word with perfect clarity. "I'm just a little scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that none of this is real." I reached out and gently touched his chiseled jaw, feeling his real, living warmth. "Calvin, you'll always be by my side, right?" He didn't answer, just stared at me deeply with those complicated eyes. After a long moment, he lifted his hand and covered mine on his cheek. He softly caressed the back of my hand with his thumb and then, in a tone that was almost a sigh, he gave his answer. "Yes. I'll always be here." In 2 lifetimes, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever said to me. That night, I fell asleep in his arms. I slept more soundly than I ever had, as if I was making up for all the security I'd missed in my past life all at once. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of food. I opened my eyes, and the space beside me was already empty. Panic seized me, and I shot up in bed. Thank God, it wasn't a dream. I threw on a shirt and went downstairs to see Calvin in the open-plan kitchen, wearing a cartoon apron that clashed horribly with my pink nightgown, clumsily frying eggs. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden halo around him. The scene was so beautiful it felt unreal. His diary said his greatest wish was to make me breakfast every morning. In our past life, he never got the chance. I had told him I wasn't comfortable with other people in the house, so besides a cleaning service that came once a week, there was no one else. For 5 years, we lived on takeout and microwave meals. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him scramble to scrape a burnt egg into the trash before taking a deep breath and cracking a second one. My husband, the man who was ruthless and decisive in the business world, who made his rivals tremble, was, at this moment, completely flustered by a fried egg. My eyes started to burn again. I walked up and once again wrapped my arms around his lean waist from behind. "Calvin." His body tensed up again, his voice laced with nervousness. "You smell nice," I said. It was true. He had a pleasant, faint, woody scent about him. His ears turned red at a speed visible to the naked eye. Calvin's ears were so red they looked like they might start bleeding. His whole body froze, the spatula in his hand hovering in mid-air like a statue caught in a spell. The oil is going to spatter," he stammered, not daring to look at me, his eyes fixed on the slowly forming, still not quite perfect fried egg in the pan. I didn't let go. Instead, I pressed my cheek against his warm back and said playfully, "I'm not scared. With you here, I'm not scared of anything anymore." In the end, breakfast consisted of 2 miserably failed fried eggs and a piece of burnt toast. But it was the most delicious meal I had eaten in 2 lifetimes. At the table, I watched Calvin across from me, eating with intense focus, almost a little timidly. I suddenly spoke up. "I don't have anything to do today. How about I go with you to the office?" Calvin's hand, holding his fork, paused. He shot his head up, looking as if he'd heard something from a fairy tale. In our past life, I never even went to his office. I hadn't even worn my wedding ring a single time after the wedding day. I had drawn a clear, sharp line between our marriage and my personal life. "The office is really boring," he said, seeming to search for an excuse to refuse. "You wouldn't like it." "How do you know I won't like it?" I tilted my head, looking at him. "I want to get to know more about you." "Is that not allowed?" He fell silent, just looking at me with those deep eyes, as if trying to discern whether I was telling the truth. Finally, he nodded. The atmosphere in the car on the way to the office was a little strange. I sat in the passenger seat, secretly studying him. He was so focused when he drove, and the line of his profile was even more handsome than in magazines. I suddenly remembered a passage from his diary. He wrote, "Drove her to the airport today. She stared out the window the whole time and didn't say a word to me. But I was happy, because I had specially changed the car's air purifier to the white tea scent she likes. That way, every breath she took was filled with a little bit of me." I looked down and sniffed myself. Good. Still his favorite white tea scent. When we pulled up in front of the Kane Corporation building, I was about to unbuckle my seatbelt when Calvin suddenly said, "Wait." I looked at him, confused. He unbuckled his own belt and leaned over toward me. The distance between us closed in an instant. I could even see his thick eyelashes and the unconcealable nervousness in his eyes. My heart skipped a beat, thinking he was about to do something. But instead, he just reached out and unfastened the seatbelt that I had been fumbling with for a while. "This buckle is a little sticky," he said, his voice a little hoarse. He quickly retreated, sat back up straight, and stared straight ahead. But his reddening ears gave him away once again. I looked at him and suddenly thought, this man was so adorable it made my heart ache. I followed Calvin into the magnificent skyscraper. Every employee who saw me looked like they'd seen a ghost. Their eyes were filled with shock and gossip, as if to say, the boss's wife, who's rumored to be on bad terms with him, is actually here? Calvin seemed to feel their stares. His body tensed, and he instinctively tried to put some distance between us. But I beat him to it, reaching out and linking my arm with his. His arm instantly went rigid, and his steps faltered. I could feel the air in the entire company freeze in that moment. I looked up at him and gave him a sweet smile. "Mr. Kane, how about you give me a tour of your office?" I deliberately made Mr. Kane sound soft and syrupy. His face, successfully, turned red again. Calvin's office was on the top floor, with the best views. The decor was just like him, cool, restrained, and with almost no personal touches. In my last life, I never came here once. Now, I was like a curious child, touching this and inspecting that. Calvin just stood to one side, watching me awkwardly, like a host who didn't know how to entertain a guest. "Are you thirsty? Want something to drink?" He finally found something to say. "Yes," I said, walking behind his desk and plopping myself down into the leather chair that symbolized absolute power. I spun around once, then looked at him with a grin. "I want coffee that you made yourself." Calvin froze for a second, then said a little unnaturally, I'll have my secretary." "No," I cut him off, my tone a little flirtatious. "I want you to make it." He had written in his diary that he had secretly learned to make pour-over coffee just to have something in common with me, because I had once mentioned in an interview that I liked it. He bought a ton of coffee beans and equipment and practiced countless times at home, but he never dared to let me know. Watching his slightly flustered back, I knew I had guessed right. He took out a full, professional pour-over set from a hidden cabinet. His movements were skilled, grinding the beans, warming the pot, brewing the coffee. Every step was meticulous, as if he were performing a sacred ritual. Soon, the rich aroma of coffee filled the entire office. He placed a freshly brewed cup in front of me and watched me nervously. "Try it?" I took a sip. It was my favorite, Yirgacheffe, with the perfect balance of acidity and body. "It's delicious," I praised him sincerely. He visibly relaxed, the corners of his mouth unconsciously turning up in a small smile, like a child who had just been praised. Just then, there was a knock on the office door. "Come in." Calvin's voice returned to its usual cold tone. The person who walked in was his cousin, Julian, who was also the vice president of Kane Corp. When Julian saw me sitting in the CEO's chair, a flicker of unconcealed surprise and jealousy crossed his face. In my past life, after Calvin died, Julian was the first to step up and take over the company with lightning speed. Thinking back, the car crash that killed Calvin was full of suspicious details. At the time, I was too lost in grief to care, but now, I wouldn't let that tragedy happen again. "Selena, what brings you here?" Julian asked, a fake smile plastered on his face, but his eyes slithered over me like a snake. "I came to see my husband." "Is there a problem?" I smiled back, my tone laced with a hint of provocation. Julian's smile froze for a second. "Calvin, I brought the files for the South Side project. Take a look." He quickly recovered, handing a folder to Calvin, as if trying to use work to assert his importance and push me, the outsider, away. The South Side project. My heart sank. That was the project. In my past life, Calvin was on his way to inspect the South Side construction site when he had his car crash. Watching Calvin take the folder and start flipping through it seriously, my heart began to pound uncontrollably. No, I had to do something. I stood up, walked over to Calvin's side, wrapped my arms around his neck from behind, and rested my chin on his shoulder. In a voice only the two of us could hear, I whispered in his ear. "Honey, I'm not feeling so well today. Can you clock out early and come home with me?" My breath tickled his ear. His body froze again, and he even stopped flipping through the documents. Across from us, Julian's face turned incredibly ugly. In the end, Calvin agreed. He closed the file on the Southside project with an almost panicked haste, told a grim-faced Julian, "Let's put this project on hold for now," and then, under the watchful eyes of the entire company, practically fled the building with me. The mood in the car on the way back was even quieter than on the way there. I could feel the storm raging inside Calvin. My actions today had completely upended his perception of me over the past 5 years. He must be frantically trying to figure out what I was up to. "Selena," he finally broke the silence, his voice strained, "did something happen with your family? Do you need the Kane's help?" My heart felt like it had been pricked by a needle. So, in his eyes, any affection I showed him could only be linked to benefits. Then again, in my past life, I rarely contacted him unless I needed the Kane family's resources to support my own ventures. How much damage had I done to him that he didn't even have the courage to imagine I might actually like him? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I asked softly, "Calvin, do you trust me?" He paused, as if he hadn't expected me to ask that. "If you trust me," I said, turning my head to look him straight in the eye, "don't touch the Southside project. Let Julian handle it." "Why?" He frowned. "I've been tracking that project for a long time. It's important." There is no why. I had no way to explain, so I could only be stubborn. "Just say I'm being willful. I don't want you to go to that place. Can you do that for me?" The car fell silent again. The light turned red, and the car stopped. Calvin turned his head and looked at me deeply. His gaze was as complex as a dense fog. I couldn't see what was hidden inside. After a long time, he relented, his voice tinged with a mix of helplessness and indulgence. "Okay. Just one word, but it made my eyes well up instantly." He didn't even press me for a reason. Just because I was being willful, he gave up an important project he had been following for a long time. Just how deeply did this man love me? Back at home, perhaps because his public displays of affection at the office had drained his energy, Calvin reverted to his cautious, distant self. He shut himself in the study and didn't come out until late at night. I lay in bed, pretending to be asleep. He entered the room with extreme quietness and stood by the bed for a long, long time, so long I almost thought he had turned into a statue. Then, I felt the other side of the mattress dip slightly. He lay down, a vast distance between us. In the dark, I could hear his suppressed, controlled breathing. I suddenly felt incredibly sad. This carefulness wasn't what I wanted. I rolled over to face him, found his hand unerringly in the darkness, and then, one by one, forcefully threaded my fingers through his, lacing our hands together. His hand jolted as if he'd been electrocuted. "Selena." "Calvin," I cut him off, my voice trembling with a commanding tone, "hold me." He didn't move. Hold me. I repeated, my voice heavier now, almost begging. Finally, as if he had made some kind of resolution, he shot out his other arm and pulled me fiercely, violently, into his embrace. The force was so strong it felt like it could crush my bones. His chest was scorching hot, his heartbeat like a war drum, pounding heavily against my eardrum. Selena, he whispered in my ear, calling my name over and over in a dreamlike voice filled with endless pain and ecstasy. Selena, Selena. It was as if he was trying to shout out all the love he had kept unspoken for 2 lifetimes. From that day on, my relationship with Calvin entered a delicate new phase. During the day, he was still the cool and composed Mr. Kane, but he would now get lost in thought during a meeting because of a text from me that said, "Remember to eat." At night, he would lie beside me, stiffly allowing me to cling to him like an octopus. Only after he was sure I was fast asleep would he dare to secretly hug me back and press a precious, feather-light kiss to my forehead. I knew everything. But I didn't dare call him out on it. I was afraid I'd scare him away. This frightened hedgehog needed more of my patience and warmth to willingly retract his quills. I began to execute my cheating plan. I knew he loved an obscure Scandinavian post-rock band. In my past life, he had gone to their only concert in the US by himself. I pulled every string I could to get a CD signed by the entire band. One weekend afternoon, I presented it to him like a treasure. "Here, this is for you." He stared at the CD, completely stunned, his eyes filled with disbelief. How did you?" "I had a hunch you'd like it," I said nonchalantly, though my heart was pounding. He took the CD, his thumb tracing the signatures with extreme care. He kept his head down and didn't speak for a long time. I couldn't see his expression, but I saw a single, hot drop fall onto the CD's clear plastic case. He was crying. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain almost suffocating. To save him from embarrassment, I pretended not to see and turned toward the kitchen. "I made your favorite pot roast for dinner. Go wash your hands and let's eat." Pot roast was the most frequently mentioned dish in his diary. He said it was the only thing his mother knew how to make when he was a child. After she passed away, he never had an authentic version again. I'm not a good cook. To make this dish, I had secretly created a smoky mess in the kitchen, burning countless batches and scalding my hands several times. But when he looked up, his eyes red, and then silently ate every last bite of the pot roast, I felt it was all worth it. After dinner, he washed the dishes. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching his less than skilled back, and suddenly had the illusion that we had been living like this, peacefully, for many years. That night, for the first time, he didn't wait until I was asleep. Just as I lay down, he pulled me into his arms. Although his movements were still a bit stiff, it was a huge step forward. "Selena," he asked in a low voice near my ear, "Why?" I knew what he was asking. "Why are you suddenly being so nice to me?" I was silent for a long time, trying to find the right words. I couldn't tell him the truth, it was too incredible. I guess, I snuggled deeper into his embrace, finding a comfortable spot. I suddenly realized my husband is actually a pretty great guy. He didn't say anything else, but the arm holding me tightened. I could feel the iceberg in his heart slowly melting, cracking apart because of my closeness. Everything was moving in the right direction. Except for Julian. After I had Calvin hand over the South Side project to him, he was outwardly grateful, but behind our backs, he started showing up more and more often. He would use work reports as an excuse to come to our house, then bring up things from my past in a seemingly casual tone. Selena was the talk of the school back in the day. The line of guys chasing her stretched from the school gate to the end of the street. I remember Selena loves extreme sports. "Calvin, with your quiet personality, can you two even have fun together?" Every word he spoke was a subtle reminder to Calvin that we were from 2 different worlds. He was pouring buckets of ice-cold water onto Calvin's heart, just as it was beginning to thaw. Julian's provocations were like invisible poison darts, hitting Calvin right where he was most vulnerable. I could feel Calvin's mood sinking, his insecurity growing at a visible rate. He started becoming silent again, instinctively flinching when I got close. The light in his eyes began to dim. He was scared. Scared that all the kindness I was showing him was just a fleeting illusion. Scared that when the dream ended, I would go back to being the ice-cold Selena he knew. One Friday night, he had an important dinner and didn't come home until very late. In our past life, whenever he came back from a work dinner, he would sleep in the guest room, afraid the smell of alcohol would bother me. I waited until deep into the night before I heard a faint noise at the door. I went out and saw him leaning against the wall in the entryway, apparently waiting for the smell of alcohol to dissipate. He had drunk a lot. His face was flushed, but his eyes were unervingly clear. When he saw me, he froze, then instinctively backed away, trying to put distance between us. I smell like booze. I don't mind. I walked over and steadied his swaying body. He was burning up. I helped him to the sofa and went to the kitchen to pour him a glass of warm water. He took the glass but didn't drink, just stared down at his reflection in the water. "Selena," he said suddenly, his voice terribly hoarse, "you don't have to do this." My heart sank. "You don't have to degrade yourself like this for your family's business." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a deep, bottomless pain I had never seen before. "Julian told me everything. Your family is competing for an overseas project and needs Kane Corp's financial backing." I was stunned. So that's how Julian had explained my recent change in behavior. The reason was logical, plausible, so perfect I couldn't refute it. Of course. How could a wife who had ignored him for 5 years suddenly change? The only explanation was self-interest. Seeing the pain in his eyes, I suddenly realized just how vicious Julian's move was. He wasn't just stirring up trouble, he was going for the kill. He was using the cruelest method possible to extinguish the tiny flame of hope that had just begun to burn in Calvin's heart. "It's not like that," I said, my voice trembling with either anger or heartache. "It's okay." But Calvin forced a smile that was uglier than a grimace. "This is what we agreed to when we got married. A business alliance, for mutual benefit. If you need something, just tell me directly. You don't have to be so nice to me. Be so nice to me." Hearing those words from his mouth, they carried a sense of humble, pitted charity. My tears finally broke free. What in God's name had I done to him? I dropped the glass, lunged forward, and straddled his lap. Cupping his face with both hands, I crashed my lips against his. This kiss was filled with my anger, my heartache, my regret, and an overwhelming love that I could no longer suppress. I kissed him with abandon, using all my passion to pry open his sealed lips, to banish all the insecurity and self-loathing from his soul. Calvin froze completely. The glass in his hand clattered to the floor and shattered. Warm water splashed onto my pants, but I didn't even notice. In my world, there was only him. When I was almost out of breath, I pulled back slightly, my forehead resting against his. I looked into his eyes, wide with shock, and spoke the words he had waited 2 lifetimes to hear, one syllable at a time. "Calvin, I love you." The entire world seemed to hit the mute button after my "I love you." Calvin was like a statue struck by lightning, completely still. Only the violent rise and fall of his chest and the trembling of his eyelashes betrayed the tidal wave crashing through him. His eyes were filled with shock, confusion, elation, and a disbelief so profound it broke my heart. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but his Adam's apple bobbed several times without a single sound coming out. Looking at his dumbstruck expression, I felt a mix of pity and amusement. I lowered my head, nuzzled my nose against his, and softened my voice, adding a touch of grievance. "Did you hear me? I said I love you. Not because of my family, not for personal gain, but just because I love you." He finally reacted. He reached up, his hand trembling as it touched my cheek. Then, with his calloused thumb, he carefully, tenderly, wiped away my tears. "Liar." He looked at me and squeezed out the word from his throat. His voice was as hoarse as a traveler who had wandered the desert for months. He called me a liar, but his eyes were rapidly filling with shimmering tears. I'm not lying. I took the hand lingering on my face, brought it to my lips, and gently kissed his palm. I was wrong before. I was blind, I was an idiot for not seeing how good you were to me. Can you please give me another chance? He didn't answer. Instead, he tightened his grip on my hand, then suddenly pulled me up from his lap and into his arms, holding me like a child, so tight, so tight. I could hear his suppressed sobs, like those of a wounded animal. He was crying. This man, who seemed invincible to the outside world, was now in my arms, crying like a child who had finally found his way home. He didn't say a word, but I knew the volcano that had been dormant in his heart for a decade had finally, at this moment, erupted. His actions were his answer. He believed me. From that day on, it was as if Calvin had become a different person. Or rather, he finally dared to show me his true self, little by little. He was no longer cautious, no longer withdrawn. He would bossily wake me up in the morning just so I would eat the still not quite perfect breakfast he had made himself. He would corner me against a wall, punishing me with deep, lingering kisses for forgetting to text him back because of work. He would act like a clingy golden retriever, insisting on resting his head on my lap while I was reading. And when I had cramps, he would clumsily brew me brown sugar tea, then hold me all night, warming my stomach with his large, warm hands. He turned all the unspoken love from his diary into action, clumsily yet fervently enveloping me completely. Our house finally felt like a home. Filled with warmth, life, and love everywhere you looked. However, the sweet days didn't last long. One day, a major crisis hit Calvin's company. An assistant he had trusted for years, one who had been with him since the beginning, was caught stealing core company secrets and selling them to a competitor before disappearing with the money. The company suffered massive losses. Calvin shut himself in his study and didn't come out all day. When I brought dinner in, I saw him standing alone by the floor-to-ceiling window, his silhouette looking desolate and lonely. I walked over and hugged him from behind. Don't be sad, I comforted him softly. Money can be earned back. It's not about the money. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a weariness and disappointment I had never seen before. That man, I've known him since college. I always thought of him as a brother. A brother. A sudden chill shot through my heart. I suddenly remembered a detail I had overlooked. In my past life, when Calvin went to the Southside construction site, the driver was this very assistant. The official conclusion of that car crash was brake failure. And that assistant had also died instantly in the crash. A perfect accident with no one left to question. Looking at Calvin's unguarded face, etched with the pain of betrayal, a terrifying thought sparked in my mind. This betrayal was just the beginning. It was a signal. A signal for the countdown that would push Calvin toward his death. The assistant's betrayal was like a boulder thrown into the calm waters of our new life. Although Calvin put on a brave face for me, I knew the blow had hit him hard. He grew more withdrawn, often lost in thought. Meanwhile, I was sinking into a deeper fear. I became a neurotic detective, frantically replaying every detail of Calvin's accident from my past life, trying to find any clue, any loose thread. But I realized it had been a perfectly orchestrated accident. No evidence, no flaws. The only possible lead was Julian. I began to investigate him discreetly. Using contacts I'd built up in my previous life, I looked into his financial transactions and the people he met with privately. What I found sent a shiver down my spine. I discovered large, regular money transfers between Julian and the assistant who had betrayed Calvin. Moreover, Julian had been secretly and aggressively buying up Kane Corp's scattered shares on the secondary market, regardless of the cost. His ambition was clear. He was planning to use his shares to seize control of Kane Corp the moment Calvin died. I laid the evidence out in front of Calvin. He stared at the bank statements and transaction records, silent for a long, long time. When he finally looked up, the weariness and disappointment in his eyes were gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating calm of the ruthless CEO he was in the business world. "I see," was all he said. No anger, no questions. It was as if he had expected this all along. You already suspected him, didn't you? I couldn't help but ask. He nodded, taking my hand and gently kneading it in his palm. The Kane family is a place that eats people alive. I didn't get from an obscure branch to where I am today by being naive. He looked at me, a bitter tinge in his eyes. I just didn't think he'd be in such a hurry. He paused, then continued, when my assistant betrayed me, the core secrets he stole were actually fake data I planted. I was planning to use it to lure out the person pulling the strings. I just didn't expect. He didn't expect it would be his own cousin. And he certainly didn't expect that I would be the one to find the most direct proof. Selena, he said suddenly, his tone incredibly serious, thank you. We're married, I said, looking at him. I won't let anyone hurt you. He smiled, his first genuine smile in what felt like a long time. He pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on my head. I used to always fight alone, he said softly. Now, it seems I have a weakness. My heart felt both sore and soft. No, I said, looking up at him. I'm not your weakness. I'm your armor. In the days that followed, Calvin and I began a quiet counterattack. He exploited Julian's greed, deliberately leaking information about several fake projects that seemed incredibly profitable but were actually traps, slowly tying up Julian's funds. Meanwhile, I used my status as an heiress to move through high society parties, casually spreading rumors about Julian's messy private life and his embezzlement of company funds. We were like a pair of perfectly coordinated hunters, slowly tightening the net. Julian soon realized something was wrong. He became anxious and paranoid, like a cornered beast. I knew that when a person is pushed to the brink, they are capable of anything. He was getting dangerously close to his final, desperate, scorched earth plan. And I had to come up with a foolproof countermeasure to cut off all his options before he could make his move. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. It was the Kane Corporation's anniversary gala. In my last life, it was after this very gala that Calvin received a call about an incident at the Southside construction site. He rushed over late at night and ended up dying on the way. In this life, although the Southside project had been handed over to Julian, there was no guarantee he wouldn't use another excuse to lure Calvin out. Throughout the event, my nerves were stretched taut, like a string about to snap. I stuck to Calvin's side like glue, warily observing everyone around us. Calvin seemed to sense my tension. He discreetly took my hand, his warm palm transferring a sense of stability to me. Don't be scared. I'm here, he whispered. Halfway through the dinner, Julian approached us, a smiling face and a glass of wine in hand. He looked no different than usual, but his eyes were like poisoned daggers, fixed on Calvin. Calvin, Selena, a toast to you both. Just as Calvin was about to raise his glass, I pressed his hand down. I looked at Julian, my face a picture of innocence. Cousin, what a shame. Calvin's allergic to alcohol, so he can't drink. I'll have his for him. Without waiting for a reaction, I took Calvin's glass and downed it in one go. Julian's face instantly turned ugly. The guests around us also shot strange looks our way. Everyone knew Calvin could hold his liquor. An alcohol allergy was an insult to their intelligence. This was my way of telling Julian, as long as I'm here, you can't lay a finger on Calvin. He stood there stiffly for a few seconds before forcing a pained smile. Is that so? What a pity. He turned and walked away. Watching his retreating back, the ominous feeling in my gut grew stronger. He was too calm. That wasn't the reaction of someone whose plan had just been exposed. Sure enough, as the gala was winding down, a waiter hurried over to Calvin and whispered something to him. Calvin's expression changed instantly. What's wrong? I asked immediately. There's a fire at the warehouse, Calvin said, his voice grave. A batch of very important new products is in there. The warehouse again. Last time, it was a call about the construction site. This time, it was a warehouse fire. Julian was using the same old trick, just with a different flavor. I have to go over there right now, Calvin said, about to get up. I'm going with you. I grabbed his hand tightly. No. He refused flatly. It's too dangerous. Calvin. I was so frantic I was about to cry. Listen to me, it's a trap. You can't go. Selena, I know you're worried about me. He cupped my face, his eyes filled with apology and resolve. But that shipment is vital to the company's future. I have to go. You be good and wait for me at home. I promise, I'll be back as soon as I handle it. Looking into his unwavering eyes, I knew I couldn't persuade him. This man had responsibilities he had to uphold. What could I do? What on earth could I do? My mind was racing. Call the police? Not enough time. Call for help? Too far away to do any good. I watched him turn and walk away resolutely, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain suffocating. In my last life, I watched him walk to his death. In this life, was I doomed to go through it all again? No. Absolutely not. A crazy idea formed in my mind. I shot up and chased after him, grabbing him just as he was about to get into the car. Calvin, I said, looking at him with a tone of utter desperation, do you remember our wedding night? He froze, confused as to why I would bring that up now. That night, I told you I was cold. I looked him straight in the eye and, one word at a time, revealed the secret that would turn his entire world upside down. That's because I had just come from your funeral. Calvin, I have died once. I've come back from 5 years in the future. The expression on Calvin's face froze. He stared at me like a petrified statue, his pupils reflecting a massive, uncomprehending shock. The air around us seemed to stop moving after I spoke. Selena, he managed to say, his voice painfully hoarse. Do you have any idea what you're saying? I do. I gripped his arms so tightly my nails dug into his skin. I know it sounds insane, but every single word I'm saying is true. I rushed to explain, my words tumbling out in a frantic, jumbled mess. You're going to die tonight in a car crash disguised as an accident. Brake failure, a truck rear-ends you, the car is destroyed and you're killed. The murderer is Julian. He wants your company, he wants everything you have. The warehouse fire is a lie, it's just an excuse to lure you out. The brakes on the car you're about to drive have definitely been tampered with. My voice was sharp and trembling with excitement and fear. Calvin didn't speak, just stared at me with those bottomless eyes. His gaze held no doubt, no fear, only a pain so deep it took my breath away. He raised his hand and gently, so gently, caressed my tear-streaked face. So, his voice trembled with an incredible, suppressed tremor. All this time, you've been nice to me because you already knew everything? His words stabbed me in the heart. Even now, at a time like this, that was what he was stuck on. This fool. Yes. I cried, nodding vigorously. It's because I know how much you love me. It's because I regret it. I regret being so blind in my last life, ignoring all the good you did. Calvin, I don't want to lose you again. I don't want you to die. He smiled. But tears streamed down from the corners of his eyes. It was a smile mixed with ecstasy, sorrow, and endless love. You fool. He pulled me forcefully into his arms, hugging me tightly. So that's how it is, so that's how it is. He spoke as if to me, but also as if to himself. I was still wondering what I ever did to deserve you, to make you fall in love with me. It turns out, the gods sent you back to punish me. He said I was sent by the gods to punish him. How could anyone in this world be so foolish? Just then, his phone rang. It was his assistant. Calvin let go of me, answered the call, and put it on speaker. On the other end, the assistant's anxious voice came through. Mr. Kane, whatever you do, don't go to the warehouse. I just found out the fire alarm was a false report. It was Vice President Kane who Everything was exactly as I had said. Calvin hung up the phone and looked at me, not a trace of doubt left in his eyes. He grabbed my hand and quickly got us into a different backup car. To the hospital, he told the driver. Why the hospital? I asked, confused. Julian probably can't wait any longer either. He stared out at the rapidly receding city lights, his gaze turning icy and sharp. His only leverage is the shares he acquired illegally. And there's only one thing that can prove ownership of those shares. What's that? My father's will, Calvin said, his voice devoid of emotion. That will has always been stored in a safe deposit box in a Swiss bank. And there are 2 keys to open it. I have one, and the other. He paused, then revealed a location that left me stunned. Was surgically implanted in my bone by my father. I was so stunned by Calvin's words that I couldn't speak for a long time. Hiding a key inside a bone? That was something straight out of a movie. So, Julian's goal from the start wasn't for you to die in a car crash, I realized instantly. He wanted your body. To be precise, Calvin said, his face looking pale in the flashing lights from the car window, he wants the key inside my body. A chill ran up my spine. Julian's madness and obsession were far beyond what I had imagined. So we're going to the hospital now too. My father left behind more than just one key. Calvin looked at me, a complicated emotion flickering in his eyes. He also left behind a person. The best surgeon in the world. And the only one who knows how to remove that key. The car soon stopped in front of a private hospital. An older man in a white coat with silver hair was already waiting at the entrance. He immediately came over when he saw us. You finally came, the old man said to Calvin with a sigh. Dr. Evans, Calvin greeted him with a nod. Dr. Evans led us down a long hallway and into a state-of-the-art operating room. Are you sure about this? Dr. Evans asked Calvin. This surgery is very risky. The key is located extremely close to your central nervous system. I have no choice, Calvin replied, his tone calm and resolute. He turned to look at me and suddenly smiled. Selena, do you remember what I wrote in my diary? I said that in my next life, I wanted to be a cat, held in your arms. I nodded, tears starting to well up again. I don't want that anymore. He reached out and wiped my tears away, his eyes filled with unprecedented gentleness and love. I want to be a man. A man who can hold you openly, who can protect you, and who can spend a lifetime with you. So, he took my hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed it gently. Wait for me outside. I'll be out soon. I watched as he was wheeled into the operating room, the cold door slowly closing in front of me. The red and surgery light flickered on. In that moment, I felt all the strength drain from my body. I leaned against the cold wall and slowly slid to the floor. Time had never passed so agonizingly slowly. I don't know how long I waited. Maybe it was a century, maybe just an hour. My phone suddenly rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and on the other end, I heard Julian's voice, twisted with rage. Selena. Where's Calvin? Where did you hide him? His warehouse plan had failed. He must have known his scheme was exposed. Julian, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, you've lost. I've lost? Ha ha ha. He laughed maniacally, as if he'd heard the world's greatest joke. Selena, you're so naive. You think hiding him is going to stop me? Believe it or not, I can make sure you never see him again, right now. What do you mean? My heart seized up. Nothing, he said, his voice turning cold and vicious. I just had some people pay a visit to your parents. If you don't want anything to happen to them, come alone to the abandoned factory on the west side. Remember, just you. Alone. He hung up. I clutched my phone, and my blood ran cold. Julian, that madman. He was using my parents to threaten me. I stared at the glaring red and surgery light, still on, and faced the most painful choice of my life. I went. I couldn't gamble with my parents' lives. The abandoned factory on the west side was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. Following Julian's instructions, I walked alone into the building, which felt like the gaping maw of a monster. In the center of the factory stood Julian, flanked by several menacing-looking men. My parents were not there. Where are my parents? I stared at him coldly, my voice devoid of any warmth. Don't be in such a hurry, Selena, Julian sneered, a smug look on his face, which was now twisted with jealousy and madness. As long as you cooperate, I guarantee they'll be perfectly safe. What do you want? It's simple. He walked up to me, his greedy eyes raking over my body. I want you to personally tell Calvin you never loved him. You were only nice to him to use him, for the sake of your family's interests. Then, you'll divorce him and marry me. I almost laughed out loud at his words. Julian, have you lost your mind? I am crazy. He roared, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me violently, his eyes bloodshot. I am crazy. Why? Why does Calvin get everything? He gets to run the company, he gets to be Grandpa's favorite, and he gets to marry you. And me? What am I, less than him? I've been in love with you since we were kids, did you know that? His sudden confession made me feel physically ill. Let go of me. I tried to shove him away. But he gripped me tighter, trapping me. Selena, I'm giving you one last chance. His voice was like a snake's hiss, cold and slick. Be my woman. Otherwise, not only will I make your parents disappear, but I'll also make you watch, with your own eyes, as I torture Calvin to death, little by little. In your dreams. I summoned all my strength, brought up my knee, and drove it hard into his groin. He grunted in pain and let me go. I took the chance to back away, putting distance between us. You're asking for it. He clutched himself, his face turning purple with pain and rage. He yelled at the men behind him, "Get her!" The men immediately closed in on me. As I retreated, I pulled something out of my bag. It was a recording pen. I pressed the play button. A clear recording of my entire conversation with Julian filled the air. I've already sent this recording to all my friends and set up a timed email to every media outlet in the city, I said calmly, watching Julian's face drain of color. If I don't cancel it within the hour, you'll be a city-wide celebrity by tomorrow morning. Julian's face went from white to green. He never expected I'd pull a move like this. You think this can threaten me? He snarled through gritted teeth. I wasn't trying to threaten you. I looked at him and suddenly smiled. I was just buying time. The words had barely left my mouth. The factory's main doors were kicked open from the outside. Blinding light flooded the space. A team of uniformed police officers swarmed in, quickly taking control of the scene. And standing behind them was the figure I had been thinking of day and night. It was Calvin. He was in a hospital gown, his face as pale as paper, a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. But he stood ramrod straight, like a pine tree that could never be broken. His gaze flew past everyone and landed on me. His eyes held fear, anger, and heartache, but more than anything, they held a tender relief so powerful it could melt me. Selena, he said, holding out his hand, his voice hoarse but incredibly steady, I'm late. Come home with me. Julian and his men were quickly taken away by the police. A long prison sentence awaited him. Soon, only Calvin and I were left in the factory. He strode over to me and pulled me into his arms, his embrace so tight it felt like he was trying to fuse me into his very bones. You idiot. He said, his voice thick with suppressed fear and anger. How could you come here alone? What if I hadn't made it in time? What would I have done? I could feel his arms trembling as he held me. He had been truly terrified. I'm okay, I said, burying my face in his chest, only feeling myself relax completely when I heard his familiar heartbeat. What about you? The surgery, was it successful? Yes. He let me go and took my hand, showing me a freshly bandaged, tiny incision on his wrist. Dr. Evans is very good, he said. The key is out. I looked at the small wound, then at his pale face, and my heart ached for him. He had just undergone an incredibly risky surgery, the anesthesia not even fully worn off, and he had rushed here to save me. How did you know I was here? I had your phone tracked by my assistant, he said, leading me out of the factory. We can talk in the car. On the way back, Calvin held my hand tightly, refusing to let go for even a second. He told me that the moment he woke up from the anesthesia, the first thing he did was look for me. When he couldn't find me and his calls went unanswered, he nearly lost his mind. He immediately had his assistant track my phone and called the police. Selena, he said, suddenly turning to look at me with intense seriousness, don't ever do something so foolish again. Promise me. Then you have to promise me, I said, looking back at him, that you'll never leave me alone again, either. He smiled and wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. Okay, I promise. When we got home, I found out my parents were never in any danger. Julian had only called to scare me. His men had been intercepted by the bodyguards Calvin had arranged before they even got there. Everything had been a close call, but we were safe. That night, I helped Calvin clean the wound on his wrist. Looking at the small incision, I suddenly remembered what he had said earlier. Calvin, you really don't want to be a cat anymore? He paused, then realized what I was talking about and couldn't help but laugh. He hugged me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, and whispered in my ear in that deep, velvety voice that could make anyone swoon. No, I don't. Because I already got my wish. I turned my head to look at him, confused. He leaned down and kissed the corner of my mouth. See? His warm breath ghosted across my face, a hint of playful triumph in his voice. Aren't I being held in your arms right now? My face flushed crimson. When did this man learn to be so smooth? Outside the window, the city lights twinkled. Inside, my lost and found love was with me. Everything was so beautiful, it felt like a dream I never wanted to wake from. I had finally, with my second chance at life, changed all of our destinies. I saved him. And I saved myself. After Julian was imprisoned, Kane Corporation went through a period of turmoil. But under Calvin's decisive leadership, everything quickly stabilized. Our life finally returned to a true, everyday routine of domestic bliss. Calvin's cooking skills improved by leaps and bounds under my supervision. Though he still occasionally burned an egg, he could now whip up a decent meal. On weekend afternoons, we would curl up on the sofa and watch an old movie. He would rest his head on my lap like a lazy house cat, purring under my touch. On sunny days, we would take walks in the countryside. He would hold my hand tightly, as if I were a precious treasure that might run away at any moment. He took all the distant fantasies from his diary and turned them, one by one, into reality. He loved me so fiercely, so passionately, as if trying to condense 2 lifetimes into this very moment. And yet, deep in my heart, there was a small, unhealed wound. I knew that the Calvin before me was whole and happy. But the Calvin from my past life, the one who loved me in solitude for 10 years and died with endless regret in a cold car crash, was gone forever. I would forever owe him an apology. And I could never make up for the entire lifetime of his love that I had squandered. Today was Calvin's birthday. I had secretly booked tickets to a concert by his favorite post-rock band to surprise him. The band only toured the US once every 5 years. In my past life, it was around this time that he went to see their show, all by himself. In his diary, he wrote, "The atmosphere was incredible, everyone was so into it. The couple sitting next to me held hands the whole time. I suddenly felt so lonely. If only Selena could have been here with me. This time, I wouldn't let him be lonely." The concert venue was packed. When the familiar opening melody began, Calvin turned to look at me, the surprise and emotion in his eyes nearly overflowing. "Selena." "Shoo." I put a finger to his lips, then took the initiative to take his hand, lacing our fingers together. He squeezed my hand tightly in return. Amidst the deafening music and the shifting, dreamlike lights, we were just like any other ordinary couple, madly in love. When the final song began, the entire arena's energy hit its peak. It was a song about redemption and rebirth. Looking at the man beside me, his eyes red with emotion, I was suddenly struck by an impulse. I leaned close to his ear and, using all my strength to be heard over the noise, shouted, "Calvin! In my last life, thank you for loving me." He froze. Then, he smiled. He didn't say a word. He just turned his head, and there, amidst the roar of the crowd and a shower of falling confetti, he kissed me deeply. The kiss was tinged with the salty taste of tears and the profound love of 2 lifetimes. I know my regrets may never be truly erased. But what does that matter? What matters is now. What matters is that this man, right here in front of me, is truly, tangibly by my side. And that's enough.